Thank you all for being here tonight. I wrote this out, so I'm just going to read it.
Go for it.
But how do I describe Avriel? You're all here to see her, of course. This beautiful person is very rare and is full of integrity, intelligence, curiosity, imagination, is justice focused, and believes in the inherent worth of each and every human being. We are given a gift today, the gift of Avriel's worldview and her chosen path of deep learning. What you are doing is providing a gift for the human family. Thank you for alerting us to the patterns of bias and for helping us to support ourselves, our families, our communities, to be active citizens, and just to be better human beings. So thank you.
Wow, thank you so much. Can I bother you to also advance my slides this time too?
Oh yeah.
That would be amazing. Thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for the warm welcome and for everyone coming out here tonight on a chilly Tuesday night. All right, so today we're going to build upon a conversation that we had in the spring. Many of you were here. Can I actually get a show of hands of how many people came to the parent night last time? Great, it's amazing. I love this. We're going to be talking about AI, definitely. What is AI? How are young children interacting with AI? How is AI biased, and how do we think about biased AI? And how can we prepare children for a socio-algorithmic world? I just want to really quickly just define artificial intelligence for those of you who might not have a concrete definition just yet. Very simply, artificial intelligence is a computer program that can perform tasks that typically or previously required human intelligence. So this is like complex reasoning, generating plausible text, creating works of art, art being a term that, we can argue about what the definition is, what it is, computers that are creating that art. And then you'll often hear me using the words algorithm and AI and machine learning kind of interchangeably. So I want to briefly just break those down as well. An algorithm is a set of instructions given to a computer to carry out some sort of task. That task might be very simple, like when I click this button, it generates this page, right? And so it's just a set of instructions. Algorithms are what make up artificial intelligence, but they're kind of like the building blocks of what computers do. Machine learning is a form of artificial intelligence that uses massive amounts of data to make predictions about what is likely to happen in the future. So it is the process of a machine learning things from having observed some set of data. And so just to kind of build that idea out a little bit more, because most of the artificial intelligence that we're familiar with is some form of machine learning or deep learning. You'll often hear people talk about like neural networks, which is fancy machine learning. But essentially what it's doing is perceiving the environment, meaning taking in lots of data about the environment. Sometimes that comes from text or things that are images that are collected that just exist in the world. Sometimes that data is given through sensors out in the environment somewhere, right? So a Fitbit that you wear on your wrist, for example, or sensors that are detecting weather patterns out in the environment that are then being used to inform models to help us predict the weather. So it takes in that data from the environment. It then uses statistics to detect patterns. You guys all remember y equals mx plus b. I'm assuming, the slope of a line. I mean, that is essentially what is undergirding a lot of this, right? If you can understand, you have 2 points, you can draw a line between them, and then that allows you to kind of predict what the other points in that line might be. That is the most simple form of machine learning. It's actually something we call linear regression in data science. And it is the basic thing that you learn when you're training to become a data scientist. So some of you, your kids, are already on their way to becoming data scientists because they've already learned what's the slope of a line, right? And then once it detects those patterns and puts some kind of output into the world, it's going to update its understanding of the world, because when you put something new out into the world, it generates more data. And then that data can be reperceived as part of the environment, and the cycle goes on and on and on. Algorithms and artificial intelligence don't just exist here in our phones or on our laptops. I'm going to try to use a human development model, which is a theory that we use in developmental science to understand how do human beings develop in this world, right? Are they just kind of little seeds that they sprout on their own, just taking in lots of input and like not doing anything else except for growing? No, of course not. They're interacting with the world. They're interacting with their family, their school, their doctors, their friends. All of those people are also existing in this larger community that's interacting with each other. And so we have all of these kind of like double-sided reciprocal relationships in this ecology that human beings are developing in, that your students, your children are developing in. Now the big question is, for scientists like me, is where do the algorithms, where does AI fit into this? Because to date, these developmental models, which are like 100 years old, or not 100 years old, almost 100 years old, haven't really contended with this idea that there are machines that are not humans that exist and can replicate human intelligence in a certain way. And they're not just happening in our personal devices, they're also happening out in the world. We live in a socio-algorithmic society because AI exists at the level of education, it exists at the level of media, it exists at the level of healthcare, of governments. Parents are interacting or being influenced by algorithms on a daily basis. All of us are, I'm a parent too, so I'm gonna say us. All of us are, we have our feeds on our social media, right? We have the recommendations that are coming to us in various apps that we're interacting with, and that inevitably has some kind of indirect impact on our children. So I want to go through some of the concrete ways that I know for sure children are interacting with AI these days. So in education, we have things like, not necessarily happening at this school, I don't think it's happening at this school, but in many schools, personalized learning and assessments. And also importantly, in government-funded schools, resource allocation is, we're using predictive algorithms to decide how to allocate resources across, say, school districts, right? We also are seeing innovations in things like the tutoring realm, where companies like Khan Academy are offering, companies like Khan Academy are offering large language models that can act as a personalized tutor for any subject at any time, and can really like help you understand where are your gaps in learning, create kind of assessments on the spot to help you be tested in a way that a really intelligent tutor would be. The most obvious thing on this list, I think, is media, right? We all know that the content that our children get on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, etc., is filtered through and curated by machine learning systems. And we call these types of machine learning systems we call recommendation systems. But you might not be so aware that AI is used in things like beauty filters. So TikTok, for example, has this very controversial beauty filter that if you look at yourself on selfie mode and you have this filter on, you can play with your face, you can touch it, and it does not come off. It looks very, very real. And this is the very beginning stages of this kind of like generative, real-time, augmented reality AI. In gaming, we have adaptive gaming experiences, so no two players are experiencing the same game. And in healthcare, we know that doctors are using algorithms to both diagnose and treat conditions. There was a lot of interesting writing this year about how ChatGPT is helping doctors diagnose really rare diseases with intense accuracy, like immense accuracy, and how it performs better than the vast majority of people who take the MCAT, for example. It's not unlikely, and I know that, if I go to get a mammogram, like my imagery from that assessment is going to be run through a predictive algorithm to see if they can detect cancer early, right? And we also know that there are biases in that particular algorithm. One of my mentors, a professor at NYU, actually has done some research around that. And in government, we know not necessarily in all municipalities, but some municipalities are very open about using facial recognition technology, specifically in policing, and then things like resource allocation, deciding where to send police forces to kind of intercept crime in the most resource efficient way is the argument for that. And then, of course, we are all, well, I hope many of us in this room are well aware of generative AI, which is the chat GPTs, the mid-journeys, the things that we think of when we say artificial intelligence, right? The screen that you can actually talk to and have a conversation with, or the technology that can produce a photo that looks very, very real, indistinguishable from something that is real. And this is what we call generative AI. But it is not the only form of AI, which is kind of the point of this slide. Let's dive into generative AI, because I want to use this as a jumping off point for talking about something called algorithmic bias, which is the idea that the biases that exist in society get reaffirmed and perpetuated through these algorithmic systems. How does that happen? Well, if you remember our first slide, AI's first step is to perceive the environment, to take in data that is produced by humans. Do humans have biases? Of course we do, right? And in fact, our past is riddled with harmful things that we've done to people, thought about people, said about people. And all of those harmful things are reflected in the systems that take in that data and then make predictions about the future. So they're carrying a past iteration of our society kind of into the future through this technology. So this is a disturbing example, but I think one that's relevant for younger kids for sure. So BuzzFeed used AI to generate a Barbie doll from every single country. So it went to this platform called Midjourney and said, generate a Barbie from Sudan, generate a Barbie from Mexico. Anything weird that you guys notice about either of these photos?
Barbie has a gun.
Yep. Yeah, blonde and blue eyes, which of course there are plenty of blonde, blue-eyed people in Mexico, but if you're going to make a stereotype of what a Mexican person looks like, maybe that's what you come up with, but then is that erasing the indigeneity of the region? Absolutely. None of the other, I think maybe one other Barbie had a gun, and it was also from a country that was experiencing some kind of genocidal conflict. That's pretty disturbing to me. I mean, in what universe does Mattel make a Sudanese Barbie and the Barbie comes with a machine gun, right? So it's very disturbing that this is kind of the reflection that AI is giving back to us, what it has learned from our world. Are biases always bad? Not necessarily, right? Because a bias in an algorithm is essentially just a systemic error or a differential treatment of one group or another. So when we talk about biases, we could be talking about the differential treatment between highways and streets, right? So let's take this GPS example. When you're on Google Maps, Waze, Apple Maps, whatever it is that you use, you probably have noticed, at least in Los Angeles, that there is a bias toward what group? Freeways. Yes, absolutely. Why? This is not a trick question. It's very simple. It's faster. You're optimizing time to destination, right? And it's optimizing time to destination based on the historical decisions that were made by city planners in the past. AI did not draw this map. This map existed way before. The highways, the traffic patterns, all of that was thought about by a group of people a long time ago. But biases do become bad when they reinforce or exacerbate existing systems of oppression. So I tried to find an image to talk about air quality and pollution in Los Angeles. It doesn't exactly map onto the other one because the scale is slightly different, but just go with me here. Air quality around the highways, especially like the 10, the 405 in Los Angeles, is bad. It's worse than the air quality up here in the mountains. We know that, right? And it's worse even than the air quality in the neighboring streets in those areas, right? Because you have an increase of traffic. The communities that live around those highways are historically redlined communities. And so what you have is as more people use the highways, the pollution more deeply or disproportionately affects the communities that have been historically redlined into those neighborhoods in the areas with the bad pollution. Is that Google Maps' fault? Absolutely not. But when Google Maps says, oh, we're going to optimize for time to destination, and therefore the decision that we make is to send people down those highways without consideration of the people living in those areas, you have to start thinking about, like, okay, what's the value system at play here? Right? And can we make different decisions? Of course, those decisions are based on the decisions of city planners, historical decisions made by city planners in the past, who had a very specific perspective on the world and goals and values when they were drawing those city maps, deciding where to put the highways. The 10 highways specifically has a very ugly history if you know the history of LA. So we always have to think about these algorithms are not existing in a vacuum. They exist in a socio-historical context where power systems are at play. And oftentimes they either reinforce or sometimes make those issues worse. This one is really interesting to me because children who are using AI when they're studying for something or playing around trying to make content that they're going to put on the web somewhere, we have to be able to talk to them about how these systems are very limited, and in this example produce extreme stereotypes about the world. Some researchers went to Midjourney and I think they did this prompt right here, an Indian person 100 times. And this is like a subset of the images that were produced every single time that they did that image generation prompt. What's going on here?
A lot of men.
Lots of men, yep.
Caricature.
It's a caricature, absolutely. This is a stereotype that is in the environment. But when a student goes to Midjourney and says, or a teenager goes to Midjourney and says, okay, I need to generate an image of an Indian person for some report that I'm doing, and this is what's reflected back to them, what's the harm there for that student?
Diversity.
Yeah, it gives them an inaccurate representation of the world. This is not every Indian person, right? It reinforces these stereotypes that severely limit our understanding of the world and therefore give us a handicap when we have to go out into the world and interact with diverse people. All right, this one's really fun. An American person. So what are some of the contrasts that you see here between this last image and this one? White women, exactly, for the most part.
They're all pretty.
They're very thin.
There's an air of confidence.
They're all patriotic.
They're all very patriotic, yes.
Chin up. So they chin up.
Chin up.
Chin up.
Lots of denim.
I think it's interesting how almost everyone is like looking off in some direction. It's like almost like a metaphor for like manifest destiny or something. Yes, exactly. The other thing that stands out to me is there's only one child. An aspect of bias for me that is particularly important is age. Many of these systems are biased in terms of age. They are not built with children in mind. Not all of them. Some of them are specifically made for children, like Khan Academy, for example, right? They are not built for children in mind, with children in mind. They're not optimized for children's use. And they inaccurately reflect the child's perspective in the world as well. That's not to say that they're going to do irreparable damage to your children. It's just something to be aware of, and it's something to have conversations with your kids about. I will also say that on the topic of age, some of the research that I've been doing at Harvard shows that depending on what age or developmental stage you're in, the impacts of interacting with biased algorithms, the effects of that vary. So some of the research that I'm thinking of is research at Spotify around their music recommendation algorithm. And we looked at what happens if you change the ratio from for artists that are men versus women that are recommended to people. Because the problem with their recommendation system is that it disproportionately recommends male artists. So what happens if you introduce more female artists into the recommendation system? Does it change people's behavior downstream? And we found, yes, it does, but it especially changes the behavior of later adolescents and emerging adults. So there is a developmental stage component there that needs further exploration. Why don't we break out into like maybe quadrants or something, if like the people in these front 2 rows and this side of the room can come over here and those back 2 rows. And I want you to guys have a brief conversation about how you've been observing AI impacting your children. And I'll give you some examples. Obviously, social media algorithms, their Netflix recommendation algorithm, like those are all things to keep in mind. Also, ChatGPT. And if you can't think of, like maybe your child doesn't have a screen yet, do you know how the systems in their lives, the institutions in their lives may or may not be using AI? And if that's also coming up with blanks, think about how AI is like impacting your parenting practice, right? What are the algorithms in your life telling you about the best ways to parent or the new ways to parent, and how is that impacting your relationship with your child? And then I'll kind of float around and we'll come back together for a larger discussion.
Whatever your case might be.
I don't know if it's really a question in this community. I think it's so different for every parent.
I agree.
But I think it's going to be really hard to convince.
I would love if we could come back together and kind of incorporate, reincorporate. Who would like to share? What came up in your guys' groups? Or any patterns that you noticed amongst what people were saying?
Some of us had no AI.
What does no AI mean? Like for those of you who are saying we don't have, our kids don't have AI, what does that mean? Yeah, no screens. Okay.
Yeah. When you think about like how AI can affect you without a device?
Yeah. What are some other ways that our artificial intelligence is like impacting? Let's go back to that like onion looking diagram that I had, like the AI that's kind of existing at a bunch of different levels of the ecology, even if it's not in that central circle with the child. I have ideas.
This is particularly, I think, just about our shopping habits with Amazon. I think about like the conversion of farmland to what do they call this word for them? Distribution centers, essentially, where they store all the 24-hour stuff.
This weekend, we went to the Rift Observatory, and I was thinking about my mom back in the 80s when like she wanted to find something to do for me as a kid. It would be like the style section or the family section of the newspaper or something. And now you can be like, kids math activities, Los Angeles.
There you go.
Bing, 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 like tutoring, and I find myself doing that a lot because I'm looking for things for the kids to do. And there are these apps that it'll be like, there's a festival in, I don't know, wherever. And I just think we're flooded with this information about enrichment, which is kind of interesting because I think it used to be much more targeted. You have to really find that stuff.
All of that is algorithmically driven, is data driven, which doesn't necessarily mean it inherently operates differently than like how the LA Times would collect information and curate it. Like a human curator works similarly to how a machine curator would, but there is something that does feel very different about that. If nothing, it is kind of the ability to go through vast amounts of data to kind of find the thing that is exactly what it is that you're looking for, and have access to all that other data if you wanted to. Yeah.
Not only that, but as someone who pays for things like Google Ads, companies with more money can pay to sponsor their posts to go higher, but then that causes them to naturally be visited more, which then has algorithms send them higher when you're doing natural searches. So then you end up having companies like Calicam who can afford to pay for more ads being higher on a search for, say, children's day camp Los Angeles, then another camp that could be really good as well, but doesn't have the same capital to be able to invest in ads. So it kind of ends up having a socioeconomic impact as well. Because even though you can see when an ad is sponsored, there's no way for a consumer to know for the things that aren't sponsored, how many of the website visits to that site have been impacted by other sponsored things, which then caused people to click on them and send more traffic.
Absolutely. I think what historians will be talking about in the future, and I think a lot of people are already having this conversation, is how data-driven technologies, predictive technologies have spurred a massive transfer of wealth. The socioeconomic disparities that we see, the deepening divides that we see in this country in particular, but really all across the West, are, I think, very deeply tied to the proliferation of data-driven technologies, and the ability to like concentrate power and resources in the way that she's describing, but at like a mass scale. Yes.
Well, my child does not have iPad access to anything like that, but she's definitely influenced by AI all the time, every day, I would say.
Okay.
Because she's fully reading now. When we're driving in the car, she's reading all kinds of signs and billboards that are making reference to all kinds of things that are on social media. And she's also influenced by other children at school who do have access, either because that's the culture in the home, or they have older siblings. They're bringing those conversations onto the play yard. She comes home with a lot of that too. So she's always impacted by AI, even if I don't give her a tablet, even if I don't give her access to my phone or a phone.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think that's absolutely what I was trying to get at. It exists at all levels of society. And it's hard to know when you are not interacting with it, because it's very much invisibilized in a lot of ways. Do you have something to add?
I was going to add on to that, like, also, like, you have access to devices and like the decisions you make. Sometimes you're Google searching books or something, figuring what's fed to you. So like through the parents too.
Yep.
The AI is affecting the kids' parents and how they're being influenced by it.
All of those, yeah.
Yep.
Classes.
I was going to say, I think it's become so normal that we don't see how often it is. I remember like wanting to listen to a track, and if you don't have it on CD, you have to call the radio station to listen to it, or you have to just Spotify it, and it's like instant, or the movie you want to watch. It's like no more driving to Blockbuster, and we forget about what we had to do because it's so automatic for a younger age. Now I'm like, oh my goodness, it's so convenient for them, but that's what AI is. It's like the conservation of energy and labor. So.
Yeah, I agree with that. I also want to say that in a lot of ways, what's coming up is we're talking about predictive technologies, we're talking about machine learning and AI to an extent, but I also think we could just like get rid of that and say like data-driven technology, like just anything that is like data-driven and digital in a sense. And I make that point because the digitization and the datafication of all the aspects of our lives is actually the reason why AI can exist. So artificial intelligence in like the kind of sci-fi way that we often think about it, the ChatGPT, the AI assistant that kind of always follows you around and can talk to you whenever you want them to, right? All of that stuff can only happen when we have a massive enough amount of data about the world, that like the just general knowledge about the world that has been datafied, that can be fed into those systems, right? So ChatGPT couldn't have happened 10 years ago because there wasn't enough text on the internet for it to actually be able to work. But now we have enough text on the internet that we can, and also enough computing power, that we can process all of that text and turn it into predictions that sound like human speech. And so all of these things are very connected to each other, and they allow for AI to exist. And that also brings me to another point. we are all passive and active participants in the datafication of everyday life, right? Every step that you take with your phone in your pocket is producing data that tells some company where your location is. That location data is then used to power all kinds of services, right? Every time you send a text message, every time you use speech to text on your device, something like that, right? Every time one of our kids scrolls through social media, clicks on something, hovers over it, right? These are all points where data is being generated. And this is something that is called data labor. This is kind of like a new area of research and something new that I've been thinking and researching a lot. Our children are doing data labor a lot, right? They are producing the data that allows for AI systems to work and operate, and essentially producing wealth for corporations that then use that data to create these services that, you know, become billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar companies. And I put that out there because child labor in any other domain would be very, very, very controversial. But for some reason, our children producing the raw materials that allow these systems to work, right? They're not out there mining for cobalt. So many children are mining for cobalt, which is a whole different issue that we have to pay attention to. It's a different talk, very important. Our kids, I assume, are not, but they are producing the raw materials that allow for ChatGPT, DALL-E, Siri, Alexa, all of these things to work. How does that, what do we do with that information as parents and as essentially we're all part of a data labor force? Just throwing that out there. Psychological impacts of hyper-personalization. No two people's experiences on the internet are the exact same. I actually can't turn to you and be like, oh my God, did you just see that thing on TikTok? Because you would have no idea what I'm talking about. And the hyper-personalization, the atomization, and really this American individualism on steroids that exists on these devices. No one really knows what the long-term impact of that is going to be, both psychologically, but also just culturally. I think we're starting to see the impact of it. It's the interpersonal conflict that we see online, the kind of information bubbles and filters that we see ourselves getting into. But all of us know about a world that existed before that happened, so we can be like, wait a minute, hold on, I'm getting sucked into this, I'm getting pulled into this. This is not how I know the world to be in its best form. But kids who don't have that reference point, I'm curious and anxious to see what the research says about kind of their long-term trajectories because of that. Anything else? Other things
Yeah, so I don't have screens for my kids, and when you asked that question, what came up for me was that I feel like the way the AI is affecting me and drawing me in through whether it's putting on music through Spotify, which I'm trying to now go back to the record player because I can't believe how it draws me in when I'm with my kids. And I feel like it has made my kids really immune to people tuning out, and that has been really on my mind lately because I try to be so present with them, and it's why we don't have screens in the house, and yet it's really impacting. I just noticed that there are times when, whether it's doing something quick for work or whatever, and you get sucked in, and that's just part of this life of ours now, and what does that do to relationships as they're, have connection, and so that,
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think I'm sure it's an anxiety that a lot of parents share. I definitely do. And at the same time, I heard some folks in, I think this group, talk about their machine learning algorithms being like a point of connection for their kids in some ways, like being able to say, hey, my algorithm showed me this funny thing, do you want to see it? And then being able to kind of laugh about it and share a moment of connection. So The antidote, short of saying down with the whole system, which I'm down for a down with the whole system, but the antidote really is like, how do we foster connection and community in real life that is like mediated and like utilizing these technologies, but also like with a true awareness of what the technologies are and what they're doing in those moments. Because what we're doing right now in this room, learning about increasing our digital literacy, is definitely part of the answer, because you can't, it's hard to have that connected experience, that co-viewing experience where essentially creates a deeper connection, and do it mindfully and intentionally if you're not fully aware of like everything that's at play, right? Other thoughts, other questions?
Something that just goes into my mind a lot is diversity loss concern.
Yes.
I'm not sure how to formulate a question about this exactly, but your Indian man is a horrifying example, and to me that's like, and I was trying to start saying this in my group about, like, I've always been a person who's prided myself in like my diverse and weird, obscure music tastes. Mm-hmm. Right? Like, I was a kid that would go search everywhere for that one thing I had heard that no one else knew, and like now I think you just can't do that off Spotify. Like actually, like some of these diverse things that I like literally aren't on there. And then they don't show me these things. Mm-hmm. I keep trying to get their algorithm to show me something weird. And I was saying to them, it just keeps going back to Drake. All you want to hear is Drake.
That's horrifying. I'm sorry. Sorry, Drake, I love you. Like, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I just, how do we fight for this? The wild card needs to show up somehow still. Mm-hmm. We need to be able to access the really obscure and
the synchronicity. We're missing those synchronicities, idiosyncrasies. Sorry.
Idiosyncrasies, yeah.
Yes, the idiosyncrasies. Yeah, absolutely. I think there are a lot of folks in the tech space in the recommendation algorithm space specifically, who think about like, how do you build in idiosyncrasy? Yeah. There isn't necessarily a market force to support that, because most people want what they want, or they want to be fed what they want. What this is making me think about is one of my mentors, Sophia Noble, talks about how Google, and not just Google, but like Alphabet, like the larger company that owns the search engine and all the other things, is one of the largest imperialist forces on the planet in the history of the world, because Google is able to dictate and then disseminate like a cultural framework for everyone who uses the platform. And that's, essentially, it's a form of imperialism. And so what happens on a global scale when one particular cultural framework gets exported everywhere else as kind of the norm, and then there are all of these systems, the hyper-personalization, the recommendation, all of that stuff, that drives people to be more, to conform more and more slowly over time without them noticing.
Right.
Yeah.
We glorify AI as like this amazing development, right? But actually, in terms of human experience and culture and knowledge on the planet, even though there's so much content, the actual breadth of human knowledge, experience, wisdom, cultural knowledge, relationship to land, lineage, myth, etc., is infinitely more vast
yes.
than what is available on the platforms or whatever.
Yes.
And so then it's sort of it's narrowing the scope of humanity while sort of professing to have this massive knowledge and access and infinite capacity or whatnot. Mm-hmm. And I just think that worries me.
Well, we also have to think about who is it narrowing the scope of humanity for. Not everybody in the world is interacting with this particular knowledge system or information system. And that's harming us. Like, that is actually harming our ability to function in a global society.
I think one of the things that, and in relation to what Ira was saying, like that worries me as a parent, as all the roles that I play in the world, is that I look at this and I'm sitting in a room with people who want to understand it better, to maybe not have that anxiety by being in a room, being able to talk about it with people. But I also think about the other toss of the coin of who is this really harming in the culture in the society we live in here in America, and it isn't us in this room.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's where I have such a heart of like I get furious, and I also get very disheartened by it, because these conversations are needed not just here, they're needed here, but they're most definitely needed in low socioeconomic demographics.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's actually happening. So that's where my brain goes as a person in my own lived shared experience, and how to like continue to foster being in real life circles with my family and my child, where she's seeing people actually talk to each other face to face and being in community with each other. That's like the most important part for me right now. But also not villainizing this, because I know ultimately she's gonna have to use a computer and have to write a book report and turn it in, apparently, on Google Classroom in 5th grade. So apparently, like, I have to prepare myself.
And then that book report is going to be used by Google to like feed its large language model that then some other kid uses to write their book report because they were cheating, you know.
Oh, God.
One thing that came up for me is, so we have a nephew at UCLA, and like the way you choose your classes is algorithmic.
Yep.
And the way they weight whether you're a first year, second year, third year, what your major is. If you're a student athlete, you get first choice in, because so there's all these ways that you're weighted. And so as much as I empathize with like the wanting to shut it all down, and we're all here because we want our kids to have this type of childhood, but how do they then go from an analog, you know what I mean? Yes, like Google Classroom is in 5th grade because it's preparing them for a world in which just to register for a class at a college, they have to understand how to log on at the right time and weight their major and figure all that stuff out. So I don't know if shielding is the right answer, unless you want to really go off grid.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, on-ramping is definitely the answer. Like yes, unless you're preparing your kid to live a fully off-grid lifestyle, which like you will have to on-ramp your child with some form of digital literacy. And luckily there are a lot of resources for how to on-ramp children, like from a parenting perspective, just like starting with co-viewing, for example. Like for the first 10 years of their life, if they're watching something on their screen, the majority of the time you should probably be sitting next to them and be able to have a conversation with them about what they're watching, right? And also basic stuff like just building in modes of communication around difficult things, scary things, uncomfortable things that make you feel like uncomfortable in your core understanding. We were talking about body literacy in the last professional development session. Helping your child to like figure out that internal navigation system so they can say, ooh, this thing I saw on Instagram made me feel kind of weird. Let me go talk to my parent about it. But the piece that I think is often missed in a lot of digital literacy circles is the need for the critical part of it. To be able to do what Carla, right? To be able to do what Carla was talking about and like draw these connections to like what is happening out in society, what is my positionality in this society, and how is my positionality influencing or informing the way that I'm interacting with these digital technologies. And that's the piece that I hope all of us in this room take on as like our role as parents, so that they not only know how to like navigate a computer and like, maybe spot political propaganda on Facebook or something like that, but they also know like how to ask the questions like, well, what is this political propaganda? What purpose is this serving? Who made this? Why might they have made that? How can I check if it's real or not? If it's misinformation, if it's disinformation, what's the difference between those things? Who doesn't have access to viewing this? Why do I get to see this and somebody else doesn't? You know, those kinds of questions. I think that's all my time. Sorry, I had other things to talk about, but I loved this session. So thank you so much, everybody.
I just want to,